Alright, let's go. Number 10, the Vinča symbols. In 1961, in the Romanian village of Tartaria, archaeologist Nicolae Vlasa pulled 3 small clay tablets out of a burial pit. They were covered in signs, not decorations, not scratches. Ordered rows of deliberate symbols, pressed into wet clay, by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Vlasa dated the layer to around 5300 BC. That number should not have been possible, because the oldest writing in the world, according to every textbook, is Sumerian. Proto-cuneiform from the city of Uruk in Mesopotamia around 3200 BC. The Tartaria tablets predate Uruk by more than 1,000 years, and they were not alone. Similar signs had already been found in 1908 at Vinča, a suburb of Belgrade in Serbia, excavated by Miloje Vasic. Across the whole of southeastern Europe, in a Neolithic culture we now call Old Europe, the same symbol system appears again and again, over 1,000 distinct characters. Geometric shapes, combs, crosses, chevrons, repeated with a consistency that looks a great deal like language. The Vinča culture was not primitive. They lived in planned settlements of hundreds of houses, laid out in rows, some holding thousands of people, among the largest communities anywhere on the planet at the time. They were among the first metalworkers on Earth, smelting copper while most of the world was still chipping stone. Not far away, at a place called Varna on the Black Sea coast, the same broad world of old Europe produced the oldest worked gold ever found. A hoard buried around 4500 BC, more elaborate than anything from Egypt or Sumer for another 1,000 years. This was a sophisticated, connected, metal-rich society, and it left behind thousands of inscribed objects that no human being can read. To grasp the scale of the anomaly, hold 2 dates side by side. The Great Pyramid was built around 2560 BC. The Tartaria tablets were pressed nearly 3,000 years before that, the same distance in time that separates us from the height of ancient Rome, and then some. If they are writing, then human beings were recording symbols on the far side of an almost unimaginable gulf of time, and every attempt since to line those symbols up into a readable language has failed. Here's where the standard explanation falls apart. Mainstream scholars insist the Vinča signs are not true writing. They call them potter's marks, ownership symbols, decoration, anything but language, and they may be right. But the dismissal has a problem. To decide the symbols are not writing, you first have to read them, and nobody can. The claim rests on the very thing it cannot demonstrate. A system of over 1,000 recurring signs, used across an entire culture for 1,000 years, is being classified as meaningless by people who admit they cannot decode a single line. The truly unsettling aspect is not the age, it's the loss. The Vinča culture collapsed around 4500 BC. Their cities were abandoned, their metallurgy vanished, and their symbols died with them, leaving no descendants, no bilingual key, no Rosetta Stone. If those tablets do encode a language, then the first written thoughts of humanity were recorded, forgotten, and buried 2,000 years before we officially learned to write, and we will almost certainly never know what they said. And the pattern extends beyond the Balkans. Isolated symbol systems keep turning up at the dawn of the Neolithic, in places that had no contact with one another. Marks on bone, on clay, on stone, that hover in the gray zone between decoration and language. Each time, the same argument repeats. Not writing, just symbols. And each time the people who used them are long gone, unable to confirm or deny. Old Europe left no monuments you would recognize. It left a script. And the script is a locked door with no key, sitting in a museum in Transylvania, older than every word ever officially read. Number 9, the Longyu Caves. In June 1992, 4 farmers in the village of Xi'anbeikan in Zhejiang Province, China, decided to drain a pond. They had always assumed it was bottomless. They set up pumps and ran them for 17 days. The water level dropped and the bottom appeared, and it was not a pond floor. It was a floor, cut, level, artificial. They had drained the entrance to an enormous man-made cavern. When they explored further, they found 24 of them. The Longyu Caves are colossal. Some chambers descend 30 meters below the surface, the height of a 10-story building carved downward into solid siltstone. The ceilings are supported by carefully spaced stone pillars, angled to take the load. The walls, the pillars, and the ceilings are covered, from top to bottom, in parallel chisel marks, fine, regular grooves, the same tool angle, the same spacing, repeated across all 24 caves, as if a single crew followed a single plan for years. The chambers were sealed and flooded for centuries, and it was the water, ironically, that preserved the marks so perfectly. Archaeologists estimate that carving them required removing roughly 1 million cubic meters of stone. That is over 350,000 tons of rock, cut by hand from a hillside, with no machinery of any kind. To put that in perspective, That is enough stone to fill 400 Olympic swimming pools, quarried out of a hillside by people using hand tools. But here's where the mystery becomes genuinely disturbing. Not 1 gram of that stone has ever been found. There is no debris field, no spoil heap, no mound of 1 million cubic meters of tailings anywhere in the region. No tools were left behind, no inscriptions, no bodies, and most impossible of all, in a country that documented everything. A civilization that recorded harvests, taxes, and eclipses for millennia. There is not a single written mention of the Longyou caves anywhere. Nothing in the imperial records, nothing in local histories. A construction project on the scale of a small kingdom, and the people who ordered it left no trace that it ever happened. Pottery found in the silt dates the caves to sometime around the Han Dynasty, roughly 2,000 years ago. That is the only anchor we have. Theories exist, and each one fails somewhere. A quarry, but quarries leave their stone somewhere, and a Han-era quarry would appear in tax and labor records. Underground barracks for an army, but there are no signs anyone ever lived in them. Tombs, but there are no bodies, no grave goods, no burials. A vast storehouse, but for what, and stocked by whom? Who cut them, why, where the workers slept, where the rock went, and why no one wrote it down. Mainstream archaeology has never produced a satisfying answer to any of it. There is a further detail that unsettles engineers who study the site. The pillars, the wall angles, and the ceiling slopes appear to have been planned to distribute structural load. The caves have not collapsed in 2,000 years, despite being carved from relatively soft stone. Whoever cut them understood the rock. This was not blind digging. It was engineering, at scale, by people who left no name, no diagram, and no explanation. The caves are open to tourists now. You can walk the same cut floor those farmers found. And the question that hangs in the cold air is not how they were built. It's how something this large was erased so completely from the memory of a civilization that forgot nothing else. Number 8, Nan Madol. Off the eastern shore of the island of Pohnpei, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, thousands of kilometers from any continent, there is a city built on the sea. 92 artificial islands, laid out in a grid, threaded with canals, surrounded by seawalls. Locals call it the place in between. Archaeologists call it the only ancient city ever built on top of a coral reef. It has been called the Venice of the Pacific, and it should not exist. Nan Madol is built from basalt, not carved blocks, natural columns of basalt, long hexagonal logs of stone formed by cooling lava, stacked like timber into walls up to 7 meters high. The columns weigh on average several tons each. The largest weigh an estimated 50 tons. Some sources put individual stones at 80 to 90 tons. The complex contains an estimated 750,000 tons of basalt in total. To put that weight in perspective, a single one of the heaviest columns weighs as much as a fully loaded semi-truck and trailer, and it was floated, somehow, across open salt water, then lifted and laid on top of the others, like a log on a woodpile. Here is the problem. There is no basalt at Nan Madol. The islets sit on a coral reef. The stone had to be imported. The nearest quarries that match the kilometer basalt are on the far side of Pohnpei, more than 40 kilometers away, across mountainous jungle and open ocean. And the builders, the Sotalur dynasty, who ruled from roughly 1200 to 1600 AD, had no cranes, no pulleys, no draft animals, no metal, and no written language. Yet they moved an estimated 750,000 tons of basalt, in individual columns weighing up to 50 tons, across the sea, and stacked them into walls up to 7 meters high, with enough precision to build a city that has stood for 800 years. Within it they raised tombs, a central royal mortuary compound called Nandao Was, and even a walled enclosure that appears to have functioned as a prison. But here's where the standard explanation falls apart. Modern engineers have tried to reconstruct the method. Rafts capsize under the load. Floating the columns doesn't work. Basalt sinks. Every proposed technique either fails or requires a workforce and a level of coordination that the estimated population of the island could not plausibly sustain for the centuries the project took. When researchers asked the islanders how it was done, the answer, passed down for generations, was consistent. The stones flew. 2 sorcerers used magic to lift them into place. Then, sometime after 1600, it was abandoned. The Sotalur dynasty fell, and the great stone city on the reef was left to the sea and the legends. By the time European ships arrived, the local people avoided it, telling visitors it was haunted, that spirits guarded the ruins, and that certain areas brought death to those who disturbed them. An entire civilization built the most ambitious structure in the Pacific, and then walked away from it, leaving behind only warnings. The magic is folklore. The 50-ton stones sitting on a reef in the middle of the ocean are not. What makes Nan Madol haunting is not that we lack a legend. It's that we have the city, We have the stones, we have the weight, and the most honest thing modern engineering can say about how they got there is that we genuinely do not know. Number 7. Sacsayhuaman. On a hill above Cusco, the ancient capital of the Inca Empire in Peru, there is a wall that has survived every earthquake the Andes have thrown at it for 600 years. It is built from limestone blocks so large that the biggest weigh over 100 tons. Some estimates run past 120. That is heavier than 100 cars stacked together in a single stone, lifted and set into a wall. The blocks are not rectangular, they are irregular polygons, each one a different shape, with as many as 12 sides, and they fit together with no mortar at all. The joints are so tight that a sheet of paper cannot be slipped between them. Not in one place, everywhere, across 3 enormous zigzag terraces running roughly 400 meters, thousands of stones, each one custom cut to lock against its neighbors in 3 dimensions. The walls are laid out not in straight lines, but in a series of sharp angles, a sawtooth plan that seen from above resembles teeth. Across the open ground opposite them stands a smooth outcrop of rock, the Rotadero, polished and carved with steps and channels that no one has fully explained either. To feel the weight of it, the largest single block at Sacsayhuaman is estimated at over 120 tons. A modern city bus weighs about 12. That is 10 buses fused into one irregular stone, dragged into position, and shaped so exactly that 6 centuries of Andean earthquakes have not shifted it. Here's where the mystery deepens. The Inca had no iron tools. They had no wheel. They had no draft animals capable of hauling a 100-ton block. And crucially, they had no writing. So there is no plan, no record, no engineer's account of how it was done. Everything we say about the construction of Sacsayhuaman is reconstruction. Ramps we assume, ropes we assume, labor gangs we assume. The Spanish who conquered Cusco in the 1530s asked the same question we ask now. Even they, standing in front of it, could not understand how a people without iron or the wheel had done this. One Spanish chronicler wrote that it seemed the work of demons rather than men. The truly disturbing aspect isn't the weight of the stones, it's the precision at scale. Moving a 100-ton block is a problem of brute force. Shaping thousands of unique polygonal blocks so that each one seats perfectly against every stone around it, with joints tighter than modern masonry, is a problem of information, of measurement, planning, and control that we associate with civilizations that could write things down. The Inca could not, and yet the wall stands, indifferent to earthquakes that have flattened the colonial buildings the Spanish stacked on top of Inca foundations. There is a grim footnote. In 1536, Sacsayhuaman became a battlefield, when the Inca laid siege to the Spanish holding Cusco from these very walls. The Spanish won, and then spent the following centuries dismantling the smaller stones of the complex to build their churches and mansions in the city below. Much of what tourists photograph today is only the foundation, the stones too enormous to move. The Spanish could tear down a civilization. They could not lift its largest blocks. That is the part that endures. The pieces so heavy that even the conquerors gave up and left them where the Inca set them. The stones are still there, on the hill above Cusco, fitting together perfectly. And the method that made them fit died with the empire, unwritten, taking its answer with it. Number 6, Puma Punku. High on the Bolivian Altiplano, at nearly 4,000 meters above sea level, sits a field of broken stone that has generated more controversy than almost any ruin on Earth. Puma Punku is part of the larger complex of Tiwanaku, and radiocarbon dating places its construction between roughly 500 and 600 AD. What makes it extraordinary is not its age, it's the stonework. The site is scattered with what are called H-blocks, andesite stones cut into complex, identical, cross-shaped forms. They have recessed channels, precise right angles, and interior corners cut so sharp and so flat that the surfaces look machined. The blocks are modular. They repeat, as if mass-produced to a single template, so that they could interlock with one another and be held together with copper clamps poured into carved sockets. There are holes drilled straight through hard andesite with uniform diameter. There are grooves cut in lines so straight they appear ruled. Andesite is one of the hardest stones a mason can work, ranking near 6 on the hardness scale, as hard as tempered steel. And the builders shaped it, according to the mainstream account, using stone hammers, sand, and water, pounding, then grinding, then polishing, entirely by hand, at an altitude where the air holds so little oxygen that modern visitors struggle to walk uphill. Some of the largest single stones at Tiwanaku weigh well over 100 tons, and the andesite was quarried from sources that lie many kilometers away, some across the water of Lake Titicaca. There are no trees on the Altiplano tall enough to make the rollers and sledges the standard theory requires. Everything about the location works against the builders, and they built anyway. But here's where the standard explanation strains. The precision at Pumapunku is not the rough precision of grinding. The internal angles are cut to fractions of a degree. The repeated blocks are consistent enough that some engineers argue they imply a template or a jig, a level of standardization that appears nowhere else in the pre-Columbian Americas. The Tiwanaku, like the Inca who came 1,000 years later, had no iron, no wheel, and no writing. There is no record of the technique. There is only the stone, and the stone is cut better than it should be, and the site was smashed. Pumapunku today is a field of broken, scattered blocks, as though something violent tore it apart. Earthquakes, looting, centuries of stone robbing, and the slow erasure of a culture that fell around 1000 AD, long before the Inca, long before the Spanish. Nobody who could explain it survived to be asked. The Tiwanaku who built it were, to the Inca who came later, already an ancient mystery, a ruin whose makers were the stuff of legend. What makes Pumapunku genuinely unsettling isn't any single block, it's the interchangeability. These are not the one-off masterpieces of a single genius mason. They are components, repeated, modular, engineered to fit a system. And systems imply knowledge that is written down, taught, and transmitted. The people who built Pumapunku transmitted nothing we can read. Their language is gone. Their method is gone. What they left is a pile of precision-cut modules from a machine shop that history says could not have existed, lying in pieces on the roof of the world. Number 5. Çatalhöyük. In 1958, on the Konya Plain of central Turkey, archaeologist James Mellert began digging into a low mound and uncovered something that broke the definition of a city. Çatalhöyük was founded around 7100 BC and occupied for over 1,000 years. At its peak, it held as many as 8,000 people. By any measure of population, it was one of the largest human settlements on Earth at the time. And it was built wrong. There are no streets. There are no alleys, no public squares, no palaces, no temples. The houses are packed together wall to wall, honeycombed into a single continuous mass, with no doors at ground level. People entered their homes through a hole in the roof and climbed down a ladder. They walked across the rooftops of the entire city as their street network. When someone died, they were buried under the floor of the house, beneath the sleeping platforms, so that the living slept above their ancestors. The interiors were plastered and replastered, again and again, some walls painted with red geometric patterns, hunting scenes, vultures, and the outlines of human hands. Bulls' horns were set into benches and walls. The dead were sometimes dug up again, their skulls removed, plastered to recreate a face, and kept among the living. This was not a poor or isolated place. Çatalhöyük sat on the trade in obsidian, volcanic glass, the sharpest cutting edge in the Neolithic world, and its tools and goods moved across a wide region. It was a hub, a manufacturing town, a spiritual center, and it ran, generation after generation, on no visible authority at all. Here's where the standard model of civilization runs into a wall. Every theory of how complex society develops assumes hierarchy. Cities, the story goes, require rulers, someone to organize, to command, to collect and redistribute. But after decades of excavation at Çatalhöyük, no ruling class has ever been found. No house is dramatically larger than the others. No burial is dramatically richer. Recent DNA analysis suggests the society was matrilineal, organized around female lines, and there is no evidence of organized violence across its entire 1,000-year existence. 8,000 people, packed into a maze of mud brick houses for 40 generations, with no king, no army, no temple, and no war. The truly disturbing aspect isn't how strange the city looks, it's what it proves. Çatalhöyük demonstrates that thousands of humans live together, densely, peacefully, and durably, without any of the hierarchical machinery we were told is necessary for civilization to function. It is not a failed experiment. It ran for 1,000 years, longer than the gap between us and the fall of Rome. There is a second unsettling detail. For 1,000 years, the houses of Çatalhöyük barely changed. Each new home was built directly on the ruins of the old one, following the same plan, in the same spot, generation after generation, so that the mound slowly rose as the city rebuilt itself on its own past. Conformity that total, sustained that long, with no ruler enforcing it, is its own kind of mystery. Something held these people to a shared way of living for 40 generations, and it was not a king. We do not know what it was. Mainstream archaeology accepts that Çatalhöyük existed. What it has never fully explained is how it worked. A stable city of thousands with no visible authority contradicts the foundational assumption of nearly every model of the state. The people of Çatalhöyük solved a problem of coordination that modern political science still argues about, and they did it 9,000 years ago, and then they left no explanation, because they had no writing to leave one in. Number 4. Caral. In 1994, Peruvian archaeologist Ruth Shady walked into a desert valley about 200 kilometers north of Lima and found what she first assumed were natural hills. They were not hills. They were pyramids, buried under thousands of years of sand. She had walked into Caral, the oldest known city in all of the Americas, and when the radiocarbon dates came back, they rewrote the timeline of an entire hemisphere. Caral was built around 3000 BC. That makes it as old as the pyramids of Egypt, contemporary with the first cities of Sumer, and roughly 2,000 years older than anyone believed civilization had existed in the Americas. It was not a village. It covered more than 60 hectares, with 6 large pyramid mounds, the largest around 18 meters tall and 150 meters long at the base. Sunken circular plazas, residential complexes, and irrigation canals feeding fields of cotton, squash, and beans. And it was the centerpiece of a wider society, the Norte Chico, that included at least 30 urban centers spread across the surrounding valleys, all flourishing at the same astonishing moment. The people of Caral left extraordinary things behind. 32 flutes carved from pelican and condor bones, found on one of the plazas. A knotted string device that may be an early quipu, a recording system 1,000 years older than any other in the Americas. What they did not leave was any sign of a fight. Here is what mainstream archaeology cannot comfortably explain. Caral was a full urban civilization, and it built itself without 2 things every other early civilization is supposed to have needed. It had no pottery, none. A complex city that stored food, traded goods, and fed thousands without ceramic vessels. And, more strikingly, it had no war. In decades of excavation across the Norte Chico, archaeologists have found no fortifications, no defensive walls, no weapons caches, no battle trauma on the skeletons, no mutilated bodies, nothing. For roughly 1,000 years, one of the world's first civilizations appears to have risen and functioned entirely without organized violence. Consider the implication. The standard account of how civilizations form leans heavily on warfare and coercion. The idea that cities emerge because someone strong forces cooperation. Caral suggests a different path. Ruth Shady argues it was held together by trade, ritual, and shared belief, not by armies. Its economy ran on cotton, grown inland, woven into nets, and traded to fishing communities on the coast for their catch. A society bound by commerce and ceremony instead of conquest, and it did not vanish in fire or conquest. Recent excavations, reported as recently as 2026, have uncovered ritual caches suggesting the Norte Chico tradition endured and transformed rather than simply collapsing, that the peaceful society persisted for far longer than a single dramatic ending. For centuries, on a desert coast at the edge of the world, thousands of people organized themselves around trade, music, and shared belief, built pyramids as large as any in the early Old World, and did it without leaving behind a single weapon. Caral rose at the exact same moment as Egypt and Sumer, on the opposite side of the planet, in total isolation, and chose peace. Why the civilizations we celebrate went to war, and the one we forgot did not, is a question the official timeline was not built to answer. Number 3. The Indus Valley. Around 2600 BC, while Egypt was building pyramids and Mesopotamia was fighting over city-states, the largest civilization on Earth was quietly running itself along the rivers of what is now Pakistan and northwest India. The Indus Valley civilization covered a territory larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. At its height, it may have held 5 million people. Its greatest cities, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, housed tens of thousands each. And it is, by a wide margin, the most sophisticated ancient civilization that we understand the least. The Indus cities were built on a grid, oriented to the compass, with a precision that took the rest of the world thousands of years to match. They had covered sewers. They had private toilets connected to municipal drainage, plumbing that most of Europe would not equal until the 19th century AD. They had public baths, including the famous Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, a watertight brick tank sealed with bitumen. They used standardized fired bricks in a fixed ratio of 4:2:1 in city after city, and a system of weight so uniform that a stone cube from one settlement matches a cube from a city 600 kilometers away. At Dolavira, they built reservoirs and water channels carved into bedrock. They traded by sea with Mesopotamia, where Sumerian records mention a distant land called Meluha that many scholars believe was the Indus. This was a civilization obsessed with order and measurement, running an integrated economy across a territory the size of Western Europe, and we cannot read a single word they wrote. The Indus script has around 400 distinct signs, preserved on roughly 4,000 short inscriptions, mostly on seals and tablets. The inscriptions are maddeningly brief, on average only around 5 signs long. far too short for the statistical attacks that cracked other ancient scripts. There is no bilingual text, no Rosetta Stone, no long passage. It has never been deciphered, despite more than a century of effort by some of the finest minds in linguistics. In 2025, authorities in the Indian state of Tamil Nadu offered a $1 million prize to anyone who could crack it. No one has claimed it. We do not know what language they spoke, what they called themselves, or what they believed. Here's where it becomes genuinely disturbing. The Indus Valley left no kings, no royal tombs, no palaces, no grand statues of rulers, no monuments to conquest, no depictions of armies. In a civilization of 5 million people, spread across hundreds of settlements, sustained for 700 years, archaeologists have found almost no evidence of who was in charge, or whether anyone was. The largest civilization of the ancient world governed itself, plumbed its cities, and standardized its economy, apparently without the visible hierarchy that every other civilization broadcast in stone. And then it disappeared. Around 1900 BC, the great cities were gradually abandoned. Populations drifted east. The writing stopped. The leading explanation now points to climate, the slow failure of a monsoon-fed river system, possibly the drying of an entire river, the Saraswati of later legend. A civilization of 5 million people did not fall to an invading army. It appears to have been dismantled quietly by a shifting climate, and its people simply walked away from the most advanced cities on Earth. The truly haunting part is the silence. This was not a small, obscure culture. It was the biggest of them all, and it speaks to us only in an undeciphered code and the geometry of its drains. 5 million people, and we do not know a single name. The most orderly civilization in human prehistory left us the emptiest record, and we may never hear its voice. Number 2, Gunung Padang. In the highlands of West Java, Indonesia, there is a hill covered in ancient stone terraces and thousands of columns of volcanic basalt. It is called Gunung Padang, and it is, without dispute, the largest megalithic site in Southeast Asia. The dispute, one of the most explosive in modern archaeology, is about what lies underneath it and how old it really is. In October 2023, a team led by Indonesian geologist Danny Hilman Natawijaja published a study in the journal Archaeological Prospection. Using ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity, seismic tomography, and core drilling, they claimed the hill was not a hill at all. They argued it was a buried, layered, man-made structure, a pyramid, with construction phases reaching back, they said, more than 25,000 years. If true, that would make Gunung Padang the oldest pyramid on Earth by a staggering margin. It would place monumental construction deep into the last ice age, tens of thousands of years before agriculture, and it would demolish the accepted timeline of civilization entirely. Here's where the standard explanation reasserts itself, and it matters. In March 2024, after formal review, the journal retracted the paper. The core problem, raised by geophysicists, archaeologists, and radiocarbon specialists, was direct. The ancient dates were real, but they came from soil samples, not from anything that could be shown to be human-made. You can date the dirt inside a structure to 25,000 years without proving anyone shaped it. The natural rock of an old volcanic hill is old by definition. The lead author, it was noted, had a long history of nationalist and fringe claims, including a book arguing that Atlantis was in Indonesia. The site itself is real and genuinely striking. Gunung Padang is covered in thousands of hexagonal columns of andesite, natural volcanic rock that forms in these long, regular shapes as lava cools, the same phenomenon that built Nan Madol's stones and the Giant's Causeway. On the summit, these columns were gathered and arranged by human hands into 5 terraces of standing stones. That much is not in dispute. The archaeological terrace is thought to date to somewhere in the range of a few thousand years ago, in line with other megalithic sites in the region. The fight is entirely about what, if anything, lies beneath it, and how the layers underground should be read. The claim electrified a huge audience. It was amplified by writers like Graham Hancock, whose Netflix series featured Gunung Padang as evidence of a lost Ice Age civilization. And when the paper was retracted, that audience saw not a scientific correction but a cover-up. So the mainstream verdict is clear. Gunung Padang is a genuine and impressive megalithic terrace, a few thousand years old, sitting on top of a much older natural volcanic formation. No Ice Age pyramid. This is why Gunung Padang earns its place on this list. Not because it is a secret Ice Age pyramid, but because it is the clearest possible illustration of how archaeology's disputes actually work, and how easily they slide into something darker. On one side, a nationalist agenda and a predetermined conclusion, reaching for a discovery that would rewrite history. On the other, a scientific establishment that, in defending its standards, hands the fringe a martyr. Both sides pointed at the same hill. Neither could see through it. But the truly unsettling aspect isn't the retracted claim. It's what the whole affair exposed. Proving something is old is hard. Proving that nothing older lies beneath it is nearly impossible. The retraction did not demonstrate that the hill is ordinary. It demonstrated that the evidence offered could not support the extraordinary. Those are not the same thing. Gunung Padang remains only partially studied, and it stands as a monument to the exact edge of what archaeology can know. The line where the data runs out, the interpretations collide, and a hill in Java keeps whatever is actually inside it to itself. Number 1. Gobekli Tepe. In 1994, a Kurdish shepherd tending his flock on a dusty hilltop in southeastern Turkey noticed something strange protruding from the soil. Archaeologist Klaus Schmidt investigated, and what he found did not just add a site to the map. It broke the story of how civilization began, and no one has fully repaired it since. Göbekli Tepe was built around 9600 BC. It is roughly 11,500 years old. That makes it about 6,000 years older than Stonehenge and 7,000 years older than the Great Pyramid of Giza. Put another way, more time separates the builders of Göbekli Tepe from the builders of the pyramids than separates the pyramids from us. It is monumental architecture, great T-shaped limestone pillars, some 5 to 6 meters tall and weighing up to 10 or more tons, arranged in rings, carved in deep relief with foxes, scorpions, vultures, boars, and snakes. One pillar, known as the Vulture Stone, shows a scene so deliberate that some researchers have argued it records an astronomical event. The T-shape itself appears to be a stylized human figure, arms carved along the sides, hands meeting at the front, belts and loincloths depicted in stone. It is not a village, it is a coordinated construction on a massive scale, requiring the quarrying, carving, and transport of dozens of megaliths and the feeding of everyone who did the work. And it does not stand alone. Across the surrounding region, at sites like Karahan Tepe, just a few kilometers away, archaeologists are now uncovering more of the same. An entire landscape of these enclosures, a whole culture of monument builders that no one knew existed a generation ago. Here's where the standard explanation doesn't just fall apart, it inverts. The people who built Gobekli Tepe were hunter-gatherers. They had no agriculture. The wild wheat that would eventually be domesticated grows on the hills nearby, but at the time of construction, no one had farmed it. They had no pottery, no metal, no writing, no wheel, no draft animals, no permanent villages that we can find. By every rule of the accepted model, none of this should have been possible. The story we were taught runs in one direction. First farming, then food surplus, then settlement, then specialists, then finally monuments and temples. Gobekli Tepe runs it backward. The temple came first. Some archaeologists now argue that the effort of building and feeding the workers here may have driven the invention of agriculture, that the monument created the farm, not the other way around. The scale of what this implies is hard to sit with. Building Gobekli Tepe required hundreds of people working together, quarrying limestone with stone tools, carving reliefs, hauling 10-ton pillars across the landscape, and feeding that entire workforce. That means organization. Planning, a shared purpose strong enough to hold a large group of nomadic hunter-gatherers together, long enough to raise stone rings taller than a person. Everything we thought had to come first, farming, surplus, cities, hierarchy, came after this, if it came at all. The monument is not the crown of a civilization. It sits at the very beginning, before the civilization that supposedly makes such things possible. And here is the part that reaches directly into the present and does not let go. Gobekli Tepe is roughly 5% excavated. Geophysical surveys of the hill have already identified at least 16 more enclosures still buried in the ground, unseen and untouched. 95% of the oldest monumental site on Earth is still underground. Then there is the final, deliberate fact. Around 8000 BC, the builders did not simply abandon Gobekli Tepe. They buried it. They filled the enclosures, by hand, with tons of rubble and debris, entombing their own pillars, and covered the entire complex until it became the featureless hill a shepherd stumbled across 11,000 years later. Nobody knows why. To hide it, to protect it, to close it, every answer is a guess. Someone built this, someone taught them how, and then they buried it and told no one. The question mainstream archaeology cannot answer is not how old Gobekli Tepe is. It's what came before it, because a civilization does not begin with a masterpiece. And whatever came before is still out there, under the same soil, waiting for the next shepherd. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe